So, hey, man, thanks for joining me, Rob. Welcome to Silicon Heartland Sessions. And you know what? Part of what makes our communities so special are great leaders like you in our IT community. We're really, I would say we're very fortunate to have such a vibrant community made up of all the companies and everything else. But it's really people like you that really make it vibrant and special. So, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I could add, I've been fortunate to know you now for many years, so this is an exciting endeavor, and I'm happy to be part of some of the initial programming, as
Oh
well
yeah.
as, as we've talked about the format and content. We both have known each other long enough to have
Mhm.
seen a lot of the changes that my career has followed. So it'll be fun to talk through those.
Hell yeah. I'm looking
So thanks
forward
for
to it.
having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So for those that don't know you, you're Rob Zwink, the CTO and co-founder of a company called Razi. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about what Razi does?
Yeah, Razi is a real estate tech startup. We're headquartered at Rev1 Labs on Kinnear. Our technology is for title offices and real estate title insurance companies. Specifically, we are a co-op for title offices and insurance underwriters to exchange prior policies. And for folks who don't spend a lot of time exchanging prior policies, essentially you can think of a prior policy as the prior title search, and it's helpful in future transactions to have access to that information. So we work to make that content easy to discover and easy to transact. It's something that happens every day within title offices, and we strive to just make that more operationally efficient.
Excellent. I mean, they say, if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to go, do your thing in the entrepreneurial space, you got to find the right niche and go fill that niche and serve that specific, segment of the market very, very, very well. If you listen to folks like Tim Ferriss and so forth, man, I'm not an entrepreneur, but it seems to me like you're following that advice.
You know, when I think about it, introducing Razi is a very specific solution. It came from the fellow co-founder and CEO Lily Farhandi. She and I put our heads together on how real estate transactions work, and both agree we enjoyed as kids taking things apart and putting them back together again. And this idea of taking apart a complex process that really centered around the courthouse, the county recorder, the auditor, the clerk of courts, the engineer's office, title offices, insurance, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And the thought of taking it apart, finding an area that could benefit from the most improvement, and then putting it back together again, um, is another option would have been to take it apart and decide that it can't be put back together and to do that all new.
Right.
And per your explanation, we chose not to do that, but
Hmm.
instead to kind of highlight a specific area that could benefit from both technology and operational efficiency.
Excellent. Well, so you've been in technology for a long time. I find that back when we knew each other years ago, you were in the enterprise. I would imagine that all the experience you had in the enterprise has served you very, very well. Now that you've made that dramatic shift to being an entrepreneur, do you mind sharing your story with us?
Would love to. My first professional programming job was actually at microelectronics. So I was the principal PHP developer for microcenter.com, which is
Oh hell
one
yeah!
of my favorite nerd cred moments. um,
I love it.
I I did have somewhat of a non-standard entry into it, in that in the late 90s, if you could program in a web language, you could relatively easily get a job. So I did that with a quarter of college. I was effectively left after my first quarter and got a perfectly reasonable programming job at microelectronics. I translated that into a job at JPMorgan. So I started as a associate level software engineer, left as an executive director, and over the course of the 13 years at JPMorgan, I'm thankful they paid for my bachelor's degree in computer science.
Oh heck yeah!
But it was a self-starter. Learned programming, and then ultimately spent a lot of time thinking about management and the type of things one needs to know in order to have a successful 13-year career at a place like JP Morgan.
Yeah, no kidding, man. Wow, 13 years is a
I
long time.
Yeah. While there, I got super interested in blockchain in 2013.
Really?
I wrote a paper on using blockchain for pricing intangible assets. I
Yeah.
wrote another paper while at JPMorgan on using blockchain for multi-factor physical security. I got a patent and ultimately became convinced that it was going to go somewhere after cryptocurrency, and felt that real estate was the first stop. So I left a perfectly reasonable job to be the CTO and co-founder of a tech startup in Columbus called SafeChain. We won Venture Ohio Innovative Startup of the Year. For folks who remember Steve Case coming through on the bus, our CEO Tony Franco won the pitch competition. We had a
Hmm.
exciting time, and we were around for about 2.5 years, and ultimately struggled to raise new capital. So we landed the plane, and I went on to be the CTO of a tech startup in Minneapolis that was successfully acquired. And then those experiences lent well to kind of a better appreciation for taking things apart, finding the specific things that's wrong and that people will pay you for, and putting it back together again.
Wow. Yeah, no kidding. I get the sense that you really take a lot of, joy in being able to problem solve like that. Similar to, I guess the way I think of it is, taking a business problem, a complex business problem, and kind of, you know, dissecting it and creating like an elegant object model, using patterns and so forth and so forth. That's my personal passion. I grew up in software development as well. So that's really interesting.
I do. Yeah, I think I have a specific affinity towards emerging technologies, and then I take just a high degree of pride in operationalizing them at scale. I spent my first 5 years at JPMorgan in enterprise systems, which is mainframe backend, ZOS architecture, CICS,
Yeah, I
IMS,
remember
mainframe
well.
DB2. I mean, I wrote a paper on using like how to efficiently run Java on mainframe ZOS to benefit from zip and zap CPUs, and
Yeah.
that's the type of stuff I do when, like, independent of or I guess dependent on the environment that I'm in. If it's mainframe, I'll figure out how to run Java on it. If it's
Right.
career JP Morgan, I'll figure out how to do something interesting with blockchain or otherwise. So
Yeah.
um,
So you've had a really interesting career. You've taken a very interesting career path. You spent all of this time, decades in the enterprise and being very, very successful in the enterprise, and then transitioned over to being essentially an entrepreneur. And I'm curious, that in and of itself is a really interesting journey. Most people don't take that leap. It takes guts. It takes a lot of different components that I would imagine folks in the community would really love to hear about. But I think one of the things that I would imagine it took was a lot of resilience. And I'm curious, are there, do you have missteps or mistakes that you made along the way that helped to shape your trajectory and to kind of bring you to the place that you're at right now?
I've been fortunate to have made zero mistakes. So
Awesome.
yeah, I I think that you know one's ability to reflect on experiences and um, dissect them and learn from them has been a pivotal uh, skill. I,
Yeah.
I I think I can actually place, though, when I started to develop that skill, and it was around 2010. I was at JP Morgan. I went through a program called Expert Engineer, which was an honor. They had 48 technologists out of 45,000 that get that designation every
Oh
year.
yeah.
And it comes with 3 weeks of residential training in London, New York, and our favorite Columbus, Ohio. So
Hmm.
I was also assigned a career coach, and during one of our career coaching sessions, she noticed something about me and sent me a PDF, which the title of it was something like Alien Voice, and it spoke about this alien voice that high performers can have that is at times like berating, it's mean. It has language that
Really?
you wouldn't use outwardly to your friends or anyone other than yourself. And I really resonated with me. And a part of that PDF effectively said, if you quiet that voice, one, you have to recognize that that voice exists. And if you can quiet that voice, you can spend time instead reflecting on what might have happened that caused it to speak out.
Hmm.
So if you
Wow.
can imagine that wrong turn on the highway and you just get really mad at yourself, I, I feel like prior to 2010, I spent a lot of time doing that. And then when I became aware of it, thanks to Kathy Belush, uh, she effectively was able to show me that if I can quiet that voice, I can now, um, you know, for lack of a better term, kind of meditate on the events and come back with two or three things I would have done differently.
Yeah.
And
No
that made
kidding.
a big difference for
That
me.
that is really that's very interesting. And I would imagine that having that insight. By the way, that's a very interesting and non-subtle way of expressing to you this is your challenge. I mean, very, very impactful. But
Yeah, and say with that too, with the mistakes that I have made, I feel like I do take them seriously and try to learn and ultimately decide what could have gone differently. One of the On the topic of enterprise to startup, I left JPMorgan with a relatively large team by enterprise technology standards, and
mhm.
part of my mantra over at Chase was, we're not late, so that's something you can count on. Our team. I had a bit of an attitude as well. So if somebody was like a not performing, you're at JP Morgan, 45,000 people. I mean, I could find someone to come in and do the job. So
Mhm.
do you want to do the job? Do the job. If you don't
Right.
want to do the job, I'll find someone who will.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever said that out loud, but I mean, I feel like that's the culture there. Like if you survive 13 years, you're
Yeah.
okay with that sentiment. If you come to a startup with that attitude, people go home. They don't come back for 3 days.
Hmm.
Like
Wow.
work stops. So, things like the Google method of, understanding what's going on in someone's life and being more supportive for some of the challenges that they may have, being
Yeah.
empathetic
Mhm.
at a personal level, became like significantly more important. So
Yeah.
that was very different. I think it still remains very different, especially in early stage startups,
Yeah.
where people have to, care for each other, which that's not I don't know, like maybe for anyone at JP Morgan who listens to this podcast, that's not the typical value that you might see when you're
No, I can vouch
uh,
for you. Yeah. I was there long time. But to your point, I mean, it's
so
a really, really big place and wonderful, wonderful people there. But when you have, we're at a company of that scale, that size, there are going to be some, there's going to be cultural impact. And I think what you're saying is, when you're talking about the startup world, culture really, I mean, obviously culture matters. If you're a fan of Simon Sinek, he said, like in his book Leaders Eat Last, he talks about how, so goes the culture, so goes the company. And I really believe that. And I think what you're saying is that is even more pronounced, perhaps, at a startup.
yeah, I think it's a great way of putting it. Is even if thinking of uh, we're not late, and we're a high performance. Like we're excellent at execution.
Mm-hmm.
Those types of things make a lot of sense at a large company. I think when you're at a small group and you're really relying on people showing up and being at their best, because you don't have the luxury of time and to be the manager who can support. And I had to learn that lesson, and I made some, I would argue, some mistakes early on with SafeChain
Mm.
that you know ultimately I needed to repair, like what could have been becoming alienated due to my JP Morgan action
Did you fall back into using
culture.
your alien voice?
you know, Perhaps. We did 360 one-on-ones, which when we introduced these 360 one-on-ones, I frankly just didn't know if anybody would do it, and
Hmm.
but everybody did, and it was actually helpful, and it was helpful in a way that I didn't imagine. So I was, I uh, adjusted to the fact that it worked.
Yeah.
It wasn't my idea either. So just listening, more collaborative.
Yeah. Well, so talking about the relationship between the culture and the company can also be said, so go the leaders, so go the culture. So the leaders in the organization play a huge role in the shaping, for better or for worse, the culture. So I'm curious, as you've kind of taken this trajectory, and now you're an entrepreneur, you're in the startup world. Have your leadership skills evolved, and in from your perspective now, what are the leadership skills that you believe make the most impact?
When uh, with my startup hat on, the one significant change that I've made in a leadership role was transparency, where information and compartmentalization of information can be important when you're in a, say, a highly political environment, or just
Mm-hmm.
in an environment where the revealing information can be part of a strategy. um, but in a startup, I found it incredibly helpful to be transparent, if nothing like over transparent, and then you surround yourselves with people who can handle that
Yeah.
style of transparency. And also, one, you get the credibility and respect that comes with, even down to how much cash we have left, or
Mm-hmm.
um, here's a client we won, and let's also talk as much about the client that we lost. That degree of transparency also, personally and professionally, was liberating, because now I'm not having to worry about what's okay to talk about and what's not okay to talk about. And
Right.
I would argue that would be very difficult to do as a company scales, but it's something that, as a company scales from being a small company to a medium-sized company, it's something that you have to be careful with how you begin to perhaps compartmentalize information in order to hold people accountable to performance goals and things of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I imagine it has felt very, very liberating, but to your point, that had to take a pretty significant adjustment on your part.
And I observed it in the experience at SafeChain. We were around for 2.5 years. We raised $6.5 million. We had checked a lot of boxes from the standpoint of how to launch and scale a startup, but ultimately, SafeChain's not around anymore. And as it was struggling, at the end there were 7 people who were really, you felt like they were there as, you'd go anywhere with them. If you needed to, they were there for you. So
Right.
it was only that was the first time that I'm like, I'm just going to commit. We're going to have absolute transparency in it. And I've said it almost surprised me in how that made me feel as a leader.
Hmm.
Uniquely, it was a unique experience and liberating, and I feel like I
Yeah.
haven't let that go yet.
Yeah, no kidding. That's really interesting. So, along the same lines of sort of, adapting, we talk about adapting leadership styles to the people. And you even mentioned just now, making sure that the people that are on your team can handle that level of transparency. And so, identifying the right people, is also important, in the startup world and in the enterprise world. I'm curious, when you think about, the umbrella term of adaptability, are there other areas that your leadership has had to adapt as you've made that transition?
I uh, the first thing that would come to mind is when, at a 200,000 person company, or a 400 person company, or a 70 person company, or a 30 person company, um, the hats one wears is different. And
Yeah.
being willing to wear those different hats, and even being aware of those different hats, is something that has been important to me. It's something that I would miss if I were to go to another 200,000 person company, but it is, and it changes. So from adapting in a leadership style, the first thing that would come to mind is that in a, say, 300 person company, it's it's arguably important in all sizes, but it may be more important to kind of ensure the relationship with peers and management. And I don't know how your mileage varies, but I feel like that can at times be some of the hardest leadership,
Mm-hmm.
where I can take pride in being part of or leading a high performing team, but if I'm not cultivating a relationship with somebody I find difficult to work with in a way that can uh, establish trust, so that when it comes time to make a decision, it's not coming from a different place.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the type of leadership qualities that I think are also, or if not, maybe more important, especially in the like 300 person organization. It's
Yeah.
important to kind of lead, I don't know, laterally.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you find that the your decision making, the lens that you look through and the way in which you go about making decisions in a startup is different than in the enterprise, especially like, when decisions are, high stakes, or, you're under a time crunch and maybe you don't have all of the necessary data, but a decision has to be made.
hmm I, I think the maybe the answer one would expect is that it is different, but I think maybe we could try out like, what if it isn't different?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I would argue when it isn't different, like, I mean, at Razi, we're two years old and probably 9 months in production. We have revenue where we have customers. A customer could churn, but we have no time to waste. Like, there's no project that I could afford to see to the end if I didn't think it would be successful. So I pivot quickly. I look at willingness to pay. If we're not pricing things right, we're leaving money on the table,
Mm-hmm.
and all of these things are important at any stage of a company. And I just recently saw a video of Jamie Dimon, which CEO of JPMorgan, and he's saying that the death of companies is bureaucracy. And and having spent 13 years at a company, I was surprised to hear him say that.
Yeah.
But the reality is for folks and who, I did enjoy my time there, and I think from a bureaucracy perspective, there is a uh, execution and performance and a real focus on delivery.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if there are many projects at Chase that would be allowed to fail. Like, well, we started it, we might as well see it through to the end, and we'll see what happens. I mean, you have to make these split decisions. One has to make those even more frequently at a startup because it's more critical. Like, you can't afford to
Yeah.
fail, say, often.
Yeah.
um, so the point of that story would be, from the decision making process and taking into account those different variables. I had met Alan Kay, who is credited with inventing Smalltalk, which is the first object-oriented programming language. He also was, I think, head of Xerox PARC when they made the mouse. He's
Yeah, man.
and yeah, he spoke at a conference I went to, and I um, talked to him afterwards, and he pointed me to an article from Harvard Business Review called "Managing by Wire," which I don't know, it came out in the '80s. It talked about Cheryl's cookies, and it was all like relevant.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is we all get incomplete information. We do our best to measure it and be objective, but at the end of the day, one needs to make a decision, and choosing to not make a decision is a decision. But at a startup, certainly the frequency and the criticality of them, but I would suggest large companies are just as critical, but sometimes bureaucracy gets in the way, and that can be the death of a big company.
Right. Right. Yeah, I would agree. Now I'm going to try to thread a needle here, and I promise I hope this is going somewhere. I hope this works. So, but the thought process that I have is, when you're at an enterprise, um, and to your point earlier about projects that can not fail, at a place like JPMorgan Chase, you have, first of all, access to, orders of magnitude more funds, orders of magnitude more resources as well, and experts. Like, you're gonna find people at a JPMorgan Chase who like wrote the book on PHP or wrote the book on, they
Yeah.
have such depth of expertise. Whereas at a startup, you have to cultivate folks in a startup, to your point, that are comfortable crossing over different technologies, different roles. You got to, like you said earlier, about wearing all these different hats and everything. So I'm wondering, how does mentorship and cultivating that a culture at a startup that really by out of necessity requires folks to wear multiple hats. How does that play with your your leadership and the way that you mentor others and things like that? Do you take I'm just curious as to what kind of approach you take or what challenges there you face and so forth.
Yeah, I at uh, JPMorgan, I was fond of reminding people that in a corporate culture, you can ask somebody for a one-on-one. Like if you're new to corporate culture, that's something you can do.
Hmm.
um, you can also ask somebody to be your mentor, and that was something I learned by doing, is that this is something possible. So I've benefited from mentors. I've been a formal mentor. I volunteer at Rev One to mentor startups. Mostly, I offer kind of solution architecture, but I also bring that fractional CTO
Hmm.
thinking. Like, are you while you may have a target state architecture, you have to be more incremental at a startup. Um,
Right.
that said, I think a big part of the mentoring experience is that kind of speed to trust. How quickly can I, in this next 30 minutes, um, become somebody that you're comfortable with receiving critical feedback from,
And
from
establishing
folks.
credibility with them, and yeah,
Mhm.
man.
And how can I ultimately too, when few things are wholly altruistic, how can I learn from this experience as well? So
Yeah.
from a mentoring perspective, I've taken, I've had the benefit of probably 6 months of weekly executive coaching, and I've provided executive coaching to um, senior technologists. And I also think some of the importance of mentoring is being a sound listener, providing these alternate perspectives as
Yeah.
well. So, the timeliness of thinking about it a particular way. I also noted, a book that I was recommended by uh, a paid executive coach, which is called Engagement Magic. And my
Hmm.
one-on-one style and my mentoring style, I think, was improved by it.
Yeah.
So Engagement Magic stands for meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection.
Oh, wow.
And when someone comes and is having a challenging meeting or difficulty in convincing somebody of the importance of something, you start to take an engagement hit. Maybe leave early, or it's just hard. I don't know if I care anymore. And
Hmm.
it's different for everyone. The cylinders that are fired when it comes to the impact. So is it meaning? Is it autonomy? Is it lack of growth? Is it,
Yeah.
are you not having an impact, or did like your best friend quit, so you're not as connected as you used to be? So I frame a lot of the mentoring conversations I have through that lens now, which I've found is working.
Do you have to first identify, like, do you ask people, like, do you ask questions to try to identify kind of where they land on the spectrum there, the magic spectrum?
And I do, and when
Yeah.
thinking about that book and the framework,
Hmm.
it was from a very credible source, like a group who does. I think they're the number one group that does employee surveys, and from their opinion, this is the 5 dimensions of employee engagement.
Yeah.
Um, I find autonomy was always important to me. Um,
Yeah.
if I
Hell yeah.
was told to do something, at a big company, if some, even just it just really bothered me. Like, I wanted to be at the table. Like, that was
Yeah.
something I had a mantra. It's like I just want to be at the table. So if I
Yeah.
wasn't at the table, it's very hard to get past
I
that.
love it, man. Yeah. Have you ever read the book Turn the Ship Around by L. David Marquet? He
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Yeah.
Similar.
It's a great story. It's a great case study. He was the commanding officer of the USS Santa Fe, and when he and it's a nuclear submarine that's based out of Pearl Harbor. When he became the commanding officer, it was known to be the worst performing submarine in the entire Pacific Fleet, probably the entire world. And he took that submarine not only being the best performing submarine in the Pacific, but in the history of the Navy. It's an amazing story. And to your point, the whole point is all about engagement. His philosophy is, I don't want a bunch of people who just go do tasks that I tell them to go do. I want people who are engaged. And what he says is, instead of doing this, the traditional, which interesting thing that's coming out of the military, instead of, the traditional leader follower model, command and control kind of structure, he espouses what he calls leader, where everybody's a leader. And it's an interesting book. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it if you ever read it. Especially with how it compares to the Magic framework. It sounds very very similar.
Yeah, and I could see where the largest group I've managed was about 160 people, and when you're
That's a
managing
big group,
160 people, it's like you have EVPs of engineering reporting to you in charge of at a small company. So
Sure.
the and as you're encouraging that kind of, I am still very much a student of that, and I could see where going from a successful one-on-one with a direct report that's not an EVP, to get them to a place of trust with their peers, like that's something I feel pretty good about. But I feel like I've really struggled with, and I'm still working on the engagement at a more senior level, and that's so maybe episode 2 in a couple of years I can report back.
Hell yeah, man! Sounds good. It's a deal. Hey, that's just it, man. I'm a firm believer. It's all in the journey. It's just about making every day a little bit better than the last. None of us are perfect.
Yeah, and I in one of the interactions I had some years ago, I think I was frustrated with a particular because I still code, I still do and remain very technical. I was frustrated with like some library or something, and the fellow developer at the time, junior developer, was like, I think I'm confused why you think it should just be easy. You have to learn how to do it. like it's not intuitive to do this technical thing. You have to open the book, RTFM. And I think the same with management style. I mean, I could argue the technical came easy for me.
Mm-hmm.
The communications, the how to build relationships, establish trust, those were all like very much learned.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Well, hey, none of us come into technology because we look forward to managing technologists. We come into the technology generally because we really enjoy the technology. And it's only, when you reach that point in your career where it's like, well, out of necessity, I'm going to have to start learning these soft skills, so you are lucky enough to have the quality of introspection. And, and so that's not everybody has that. Not everybody makes it. I'm sure you can have horror stories yourself. Lots of senior leaders out there that just they're not good leaders. Just unfortunately.
Yeah, and the plug for the alien voice, it is true. I mean, I remember it keenly, that moment when I'm like, this is me. And it just kind of super powered my introspection. And then also at that same time, going through the expert engineer program, and they had a lot of awesome programming around that. And I challenged myself to overcome my fear of public speaking. So I took my mainframe project that I was working on and wrote a paper. It was presented at an IBM Share conference. I practiced in front of the mirror the night before, and exactly 3 people showed up. But,
That's awesome.
Got to start somewhere.
Hell yeah, man. That is so cool, man. I wanted to also explore a little bit with you, the notion of diversity and inclusion. I have to, and it's not just, obviously, diversity and inclusion is important regardless of whether you're in the enterprise or whether you're in a startup. We all have our own journeys, and diversity and inclusion is something that's embedded in many, many cultures, incredibly important, especially given the fact that we live in a very diverse world, very diverse country. It's a wonderful thing. So I'm just curious as to how do you approach diversity and inclusion in your world?
Yeah, and thanks for asking. I should start with, the I'm surrounded by strong women. I have a beautiful, strong wife. My co-founder Razi is Iranian, and came to the U.S. to get an engineering degree from Purdue. I One of my favorite managers at Chase is CEO of EngFlow now, a former Googler, and I mentioned that because I have at this point it's kind of part of my professional DNA. Like I don't I like I think we live in a different time where I'm seeing more and more strong female leaders within engineering. In recognition of the path and the we haven't gone far enough. It's still a topic that um, I think it's important to talk about it. I suppose it's also just maybe important for us to talk about, two men. um,
Yeah.
one way that I feel is important to me from a diversity and inclusion perspective is to put effort, meaningful effort, into the hiring. This was arguably like more important when one's doing a lot of hiring, in that you need to ensure that the balance that it reflects the area where you live, the industry that you're operating in.
Yeah. Agree.
I think that there is a moment when you might have a great candidate, but then would you know not necessarily reflect the organization, the image of the organization you'd ideally have for it, and
Hmm.
you might have to make a tough decision to try harder to find a candidate that
Yeah.
uh, creates that balance. And I I do my best to live that, and I
Yeah.
put effort into living that. So while Razi continues to grow, I have every expectation that it will reflect the values that Lily and I share around ensuring that we um, give everyone an opportunity. And I think that maybe the part worth maybe reiterating is sometimes that means passing on a great candidate for like an even better candidate that happens to
Hmm.
match your goals.
Well, and the reality is that diverse teams are just more higher performing. That's just how it works. When you have a team that's composed of a diverse set of folks who bring all of their wonderful experiences and the difference of perspectives, your team is just going to be more high performing, and that's been shown to be the case. So not only does it you know make ethical sense and so forth, but it also just makes really really good business sense.
Yeah, and I should mention there's kind of the how, why, what. I probably should have started with why, which I would 100% agree with you. I think when I imagine the type of success that I want in my professional career, like, and the type of people that I want to have around me, um, it's people with different perspectives,
Yeah,
people with different backgrounds,
I'm
people
with you.
that look different than me, and
Hell yeah.
it's something that I value, um, and but I guess from a it may mean extra work,
Hmm.
and it's work we do our best to put in.
So, speaking of diversity and so forth, and in particular, in your hiring process, I know you're a fan of this concept of principle-driven hiring, and Joel Spolsky, and he's got the Guerrilla Guide to interviewing. I'm just curious if you could maybe talk a bit about that, and how you kind of approach the interviewing process in your unique way.
Yeah, and I think that where hiring matters in both large enterprise and maybe even especially small companies that are growing, like the typified startup, um, there's uh, one has to be kind of cognizant of the goal. Like when you're hiring, it's not necessarily to get to 7 engineers. It's to get to the right balance of people from a pod perspective, or depending on if you're building around a flat org, or and when putting teams like that together, I was referred to this Guerrilla Guide to Interviewing now years ago by Devin Smith, who may or may not listen to this podcast, but thank you, Devin. And it's I read this Guerrilla Guide to Interviewing probably at least once a year, and
Wow.
it's a reminder to me that who am I looking for? This whole kind of concept of smart and can get things done. Those are the best, especially when you need somebody to wear different hats. So um, the at this stage, one of my favorite questions in when interviewing is, if I were to give you $1 million and you could work and you need to you and a project, like what tech stack would you use?
Hmm.
And I think there's two perfectly good answers to that. Like one, probably the right answer is it depends on the project,
Yeah,
so fair,
there you go.
fair. What I like to hear though is something like, oh, Python, Django, I mean, have you seen this other framework, like
Yeah.
like whatever the passion is. It's like this person is waking up thinking about the opportunity to apply this technology or stack.
Right.
And they need to be coachable, of course. So like, can't. It is important. Depends on the project, but just looking for that enthusiasm and passion. So
Hell yeah. That's awesome,
his
man.
his article does a great job of explaining. If you had to do X, Y, Z, and you had to do it in 3 days,
Hmm.
is it important if they have a certification in unified modeling language, and or is it more important that they've it's somebody who essentially you want to work with every day, who's clever and smart and can figure things out. And another thing in that, and I suppose aligns with the principle, is he spends probably half of this article talking about it, is there's a typically some kind of interviewing canvas, and everybody gets to put their 2 cents in, and if anybody says no, it's no. If you say no, if you say maybe, but for someone else it's no, and he kind of does another good job of
Hmm.
getting that out there too.
That's
So
interesting. I'll have to read it.
um,
Thanks for the tip.
yeah. And then I suppose tying it to the diversity side too, it's at the end of the day, it's hard. I guess maybe sometimes it's harder to say no to somebody who doesn't check all of the boxes because they check enough, and it's difficult. It still remains a difficult market to find like good people,
Yeah.
but essentially that's another part of the, if I were to associate it with the principle, is just if there's any doubt, then just no, because it's worth putting in the time to find the right person.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. What about scale? So you're talking about, building these diverse teams that are comprised of people who, sort of have in their DNA the ability to wear multiple hats, but also are passionate about technologies and so forth. What can you tell me about, managing engineering teams at different stages of a company, from like 3 to 160?
Mhm. Yeah, I think I maybe this is a little bit of the thread through the needle too, but the this engagement magic, if you start asking enough questions, you can get to know someone through this lens, and
Hmm.
as one can, um, then you can start to understand what motivates them, and I feel like when thinking about an engineering team versus say like a high performing sales team, that's one common thread, which is what's motivating them. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
in the startup world, a lot of people want to be the CEO of a startup, so giving them access and um, allowing like a degree of like you're at the table, like you're not just at the table for technical decisions, you're at the table as we're making business decisions,
Hmm.
um, is probably 9 times out of 10. I think sometimes a solid engineer just wants to be left alone, and if you can give them the projects and the time and the freedom
Hmm.
to, so putting the team together, if you can't have all of the same type of person, so then maybe that's where that sort of other side of diversity can come in as well, which is to bring in the person who wants to be the CEO, which fortunately in the startup world that is something one can do. Like you can find engineers that are interested in entrepreneurship that are coming out of college with advanced degrees, or like top of their class. That's they either go to probably Microsoft, or I mean or Grange. They go to awesome businesses around Columbus. Sometimes they come to Rev One just looking around for like, well, how can I get started? And I think the challenge of that would be trying to get started at a startup where you're not given access to the CEO, to the CTO, to the head of sales. Like, how does HubSpot work? What's a sales funnel? Like all these, um, so uh, the flip side of that with, say, a medium-sized company and bringing in the right talent, um, I would argue probably that panel is important.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a 300-person company with 160 engineers, there is a fair degree of consensus and buy-in that needs to be navigated.
I bet that can be tricky.
Yeah.
But to your point, I mean, when we're talking about engagement and so forth and moving forward together as a team, what do you do when you're faced with a situation where, you have to make a decision that maybe it's a tough decision, and maybe out of necessities because it's tough times. How do you maintain motivation for yourself, for your team? How do you instill that resilience into your organization?
Hmm. It's a great question. I at times like to think about an answer, but then I don't know. The first thing that came to mind
Mm-hmm.
was, I have something that I don't do it as much as I used to when I was working from home more, but I call it the Mr. Rogers moment, where I would like stop my work from home day and I would put a record on and I would listen to a record, and then I would, be home and I would, do something like make dinner and sit
Mm-hmm.
and eat it with the family. um, so there is that transition period. I, I like to make sure that I still have it. It's a lot easier to have it when you're coming to the office and, I either ride my bike home or I drive home and I'm home. But when I'm
Yeah.
at work, I'm at work. When I'm at
Mm-hmm.
work, I mean, I talk about transparency, and I do think it's important, and I do trust. And if I have a challenging conversation, I can be honest and transparent about that too. And if I do it in a way that's respectful and appropriate, then um, that is the strategy. So
Hell yeah.
I I feel like through maybe that ability now where we're transparent, those types of direct conversations don't come across as rude too. Like at a large company, I mean, one can pound the table, you can call up somebody and scream at them. We don't do that at startups, like I said, because people just go home and work stops. So if you give somebody feedback that's critical, then you don't have trust in a relationship. It's like,
Yeah.
that can be bad too. So I
Yeah.
think,
So yeah.
having kind of a, fine line between like true friendship, but it's like we're all here, we're all working. This is work. It can be fun, but at the end of the day, it's my job to give
Mm-hmm.
feedback.
Yeah.
Being kind of a student of giving my own self feedback, I do my best to do that in a balanced and respectful way.
Well, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I mean, to me, it's, if I'm hearing you, it's all that work you have to do up front to establish the right culture that, to your point, is based on trust and based on safety, so that when it comes time to have a difficult discussion, or it comes time to break bad news and continue to have that motivation, doing that on a foundation of trust and safety, that is all about the work you did way before that moment arrived. Yeah, that really resonates with me.
Yeah, and you'd also ask, how do I stay then? I don't know if it was motivated or
Yeah.
kind of through that
Mm-hmm.
experience, because I have been a part of large layoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I've was part of a landed the plane with SafeChain. ClickSwitch was fortunately a successful acquisition. In large part thanks to the CEO there at the time, Cale Johnston, and then the hard work of the engineering team and the the as I mentioned, the Mr. Rogers moment, listening to records. I do love music, and there's the band Concrete Blonde, the lead singer Johnette Napolitano. She has a song. It's called "The Highs are way too high and the lows are way too low,"
Mm-hmm.
and
What album is
that's
that off?
also
Is that off the
directly.
album that Joey's on,
No,
or is that on the one before that?
it's it was a band before Concrete Blonde called Pretty
Oh,
and Twisted.
oh, okay. I'd never even heard of Pretty and Twisted. I'm telling you, I was into Concrete Blonde back in the '80s. Did you ever hear that
Oh
song
man.
"Still in Hollywood"?
Oh yeah.
That's my
Yeah.
favorite Concrete Blonde song, man. Yeah, they're a great band.
Yeah. Yeah, Joey was, I think, my first single I ever bought.
Yeah, man, that's
Um,
awesome. Heck yeah.
but the highs are way too high, the lows are way too low. It's I think a reminder that while it's important to be excited when there's success, I generally remind myself not to get too excited
Yeah,
because
yeah,
if I get too excited and then something doesn't go the way I want it to, then it can be like devastating.
yeah.
So I think having a balance around work and being willing to celebrate
Hell yeah.
with the team, but not overly
Hmm.
in order to allow the tough times to not be as kind of
It's almost like
devastating
an
or
element
challenging.
of stoicism, and some of the wisdom that you get from reading some of the writings from the Stoics. Don't. So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't want to come across as a wet blanket. I mean, I certainly
No, it's all good,
do
man.
like to have fun, but
Oh, of course. Yeah, no doubt.
yeah.
Speaking of having fun, do you want to transition and maybe talk some tech?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So, I know we talked earlier about blockchain and so forth. Obviously, you've got a lot of stuff going on at Razi with artificial intelligence. You talked about PHP and all mainframe stuff and everything else, Java. What technologies are you most passionate about, and why?
Nice. Yeah, and I do think there is a theme in my career. I mean, even PHP and whatever 99 when it 3 came out, like that was something pretty special. If you're like, but prior to that, it was like CGI Ben and Perl, and then
I remember,
PHP comes
man.
around with
Oh my
its.
gosh, man. I just, yeah,
um,
cool times,
and then
man.
I mentioned, yeah, mainframe, ZOS, Linux. I don't know where that's at these days, but that was interesting. I mean,
Hmm.
I was chief application architect for a spell at a line of business at Chase called Intelligent Solutions that was charged with monetizing the bank's big data assets. I um I feel like I'm just drawn to emerging technology. So
Yeah, man.
the I'd say the thing that is most interesting to me right now is local large language models.
Local large
So
language models. You're gonna have to explain that for everybody. What is the triple LM LLLM?
yeah. So I went to Micro Center with our corporate card. I spent $3,000, and it was the best day of my life. I mean, close, but and I like just bought and built the best PC that money could buy as of, I mean, for $3,000 could buy, which was
With
a 24
GPUs and
gigabyte
everything.
NVIDIA, yeah,
Yeah,
40
hell yeah.
i9, like all the RAM, all that stuff. It was fun. So um, I can install Olama, which is a kind of a management tool for local large language models. And then using Olama, I can install open source large language models like Llama 3,
Hmm.
which is Meta.
Meta or Anthropic or
Mhm.
any of the other big ones.
Yeah, like you kind of browse Hugging Face website and see
Yeah.
the different text generation models, and then with Olama, you can install them on a $3,000 PC and start having conversations with large language models. And what makes them local is if you unplug the internet, they still work. So
Right. Yeah, you've got
they're
to locally install
large,
on that machine. Yeah. That's cool, man.
and and then what Razi is using it for, which I'm going to try out this, like, imagine the subject line of a paper or something. That's it's contextual question and answering with consensus
Hmm.
for normalized named entity recognition. So essentially, I can take a document and um, I can extract the policy number from it.
Hmm.
Um, Given that these large language models are they are prone to at times provide an answer even if it's not in the original context. So in this case, the context would be the document. I ask for policy number, it might come back with nothing, or in some rare cases, it might come back with something like completely wrong.
And
This is like
is that what you call a hallucination?
mhm.
Yeah.
So by allowing for multiple large language models to effectively extract the same answer. Then through consensus, if say 2 of the 3 large language models agree, then you have your answer.
That's
In that
fascinating.
they kind of, at least I haven't observed a large language model hallucinating the same way as
Mm-hmm.
another one. So it's not, I haven't proven that, but I feel like just anecdotally, it solves for contextual question and
Mm-hmm.
answering with consensus for normalized named entity recognition. So like I'm extracting the policy number, the key, I can put it into a database, and I can do this at scale. And because it's local, I can do that with kind of a horizontally scalable server infrastructure, which, like, unlike the application of blockchain for real estate, like I can do that today, and people will use it, and people are using it. So I say that unlike blockchain for real estate, in that that still going to take some time, but for indexing documents, instead of having regular expression or template-based regular expressions or natural language processing or other sort of more advanced techniques,
Mm-hmm.
it seems to be working great with this approach,
And is
and it's
that,
exciting.
yeah, that is exciting. And that, so I'm curious, the consensus piece of that is there another large language model that is assessing and performing and automating that consensus? Or do you have, is that automated, or is the human looking at it and going, oh, okay, I've got 3 answers.
So um, the idea there is that there's patterns and operations, and one pattern is maker, checker, verifier. So if you take this pattern of maker, checker, verifier, so somebody's going to, like, and you do it without AI. A human is a typist and keying in the
Mm-hmm.
policy number from the policy number form, and then a checker is making sure that the person did that. They might visually inspect that it is done that way. That now they don't have to key it, but they could look at it and be like, yeah, they keyed it correctly, or reject it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the verifier can either verify the checker or the maker, but in my case, the verifier verifies the checker. The checker do their job. So if you look at maker, checker, verifier, and essentially a human fills each one of those positions, and then you say, okay, well, what if I take one of those positions and put AI in it? Um, the Probably the least impactful one to put AI into is verifier.
Right.
Um, um, you can put them in all three. So in the
Mm-hmm.
case of indexing documents using this consensus model, you could have, when I say AI too, I mean, you could have a fuzzy matching library, make sure that the policy numbers across all 3 large language model outputs
Mm-hmm.
are the same. So like a if condition,
Yeah, you
if
could
this,
you
if
could
this, and
just
this
use
is
regular
equal.
expressions. Yeah.
You
Mm-hmm.
could do if 2 of them agree rather than 3. So you can kind
Yeah.
of imagine a business process diagram that implements some business rules around what is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that it allows, and I feel like why it excites me, is that it takes some of the challenges of hallucinations out of the problem, so it becomes truly uh, contextual. Like it can't answer something that isn't part of the
Mm-hmm.
document. And you could, as part of the verification step, you could look for that uh, data that was extracted from within the document,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of have a more advanced verification
Yeah.
there too.
Hell
So
yeah. I thought you were going to
I think
say what excited you the most was that you implemented the verifier as a regular expression in PHP, and it was super cool.
nice. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Yeah. No, it has. If like I feel like a lot of technology from the introduction of computers into business has
Mm-hmm.
been, how do we get information out of documents? And we as humans communicate through documents, but computers have they want their JSON structure and CSV files or fixed width. It's like, so to take a document that we use to talk to each other and ensure that a computer can do it is a challenge across the board. And I feel like the more we can index the I actually used a metaphor earlier, which was you'll appreciate this. A book by Ludwig Wittgenstein. I think it's his only like published book, which had to do with in the intro to that book, he's like, I want this to be a ladder that somebody climbs and then throws away so that
Hmm.
they can climb the next ladder.
Oh,
And
hell yeah, man.
there are times that I think about emerging technology in the world that I want to write software in, that having I don't know, highly indexed documents, so that like the kind of the relationship between them and other documents, kind of the proverbial graph database, just will create a place where a significantly more interesting technology can thrive,
Hell yeah.
like Chat GPT.
Hmm.
So I think that'll be exciting to see what the next couple of years will look like.
Oh yeah. Yeah, excellent. Speaking of that, what emerging technologies do you see having like the most significant impact on your industry in the next 5 to 10 years? And I would be really interested. I've been dying to ask you. I know you spent a lot of time, writing blockchain applications and so forth. What's your thought on blockchain and the longevity of that technology?
Hmm. Yeah. So the on the blockchain topic, I was a CTO and co-founder of SafeChain, which
Hmm.
for folks that uh, were aware of it in Columbus, it was exciting to me. It was exciting to the people there. It was exciting to a lot of other people in Columbus. Like I feel like the concept of
Yeah.
blockchain um, being applied to real estate transactions is something that I think a lot of people can appreciate the application of. Um, and blood, sweat, and tears for 2.5 years.
I believe it.
Um, the I think I remember being most interested in blockchain when as I mentioned, the mainframe experience, like IBM, DB2, IMS, and then it seems like most database systems kind of came from those two things, like relational or sequential. And and I'm sure I'm doing like Neo4j a disservice by saying that, but it's like high performance like LDAP versus,
Mhm.
or Microsoft SQL, Oracle, etc. Then blockchain comes around. It's like we're a like fault tolerant cluster that is immutable, and what can someone do with that? This is a new type of database. Like
Mhm.
I'd
Right.
argue, if you accept my DB2 IMS example, it wasn't since 1960 this kind of innovation had come around. I think what I now have an appreciation for is that it's very expensive to operate. And while it's kind of depressing to hear from somebody who who may or may not be credible in this space, but when I think about it from a property transaction perspective, because it's expensive to operate, one has to look at, well, why do we have the systems we have in place today? Like, why does it take 45 days to transact real estate? Um,
Right.
you know, uh, I and that's not necessarily directly related to blockchain, but so while I think blockchain and people seem to be happy with Bitcoin, and I feel like it's going to have a difficult road, because of I say expense too. It's also like the expense that comes with changing. You know, I can attest. There's Of the 88 county recorders in Ohio, none of them are raising their hand to be replaced with a kiosk. So to affect that type of change is also expensive. I
Yeah,
mean,
no
it can
kidding.
be done.
That's
It's
well
like
said.
lobbying. It's
Hmm.
so
Wow.
um, so I would say at this point I would probably even identify as a blockchain skeptic, which
Really? Wow.
I don't often say publicly, but here I go. But I still would enjoy talking about it, and for the folks who are crypto
Hmm.
enthusiasts, certainly that's kind of what they're excited about.
And I'll be honest with you, man. It was just an itch that I had to scratch just to ask you the question. We don't need to go
No,
into too much detail. I assume
I
that.
appreciate you asking.
Yeah, yeah,
It
man.
is
Yeah, hell
something
yeah,
I've thought about, as you've heard.
hell yeah, hell yeah.
um, but yeah, and then I think the large language models in general. I mean, I think finding applications, even as the one I've described, like using large language models for contextual question and answering.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk to folks who are excited about large language models, they're like, "Oh yeah, I didn't know you could do that," or it's an interesting application of it. I think as we see things like images being generated, 3D mesh objects being created from single images,
Hmm.
the idea of not having to train a model, but if you give it 5 different categories, it'll classify something accurately. So like zero shot classification. As things get faster and we start to apply this type of technology in places that one might not anticipate, I think that's exciting. I
What
think
if,
that the go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, I would imagine there's a lot of folks who don't know what zero shot classification is. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, like if you're gonna a classifier, well, so uh, in my mind, a classifier is you give it, say, a email, and it'll tell you if it's spam or not.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Another type of classifier could be like, say, you give it a PDF with 9 different types of documents in it.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at each page, and it'll tell you the type of page it is because it's classifying it. And traditionally, with advanced like neural networks, you can build these classifiers by training them with a labeled data set. So essentially,
Mm-hmm.
you take the pages from the PDF and put them into folders. Then you name the folders like this is a Schedule A, this is a Schedule B, this is an Exhibit A, this is an endorsement or otherwise a policy jacket correspondence. And then you train your classifier, and now it can kind of magically tell you the type of page it is without having seen the page before because it's seen other pages like it.
Mm-hmm.
A zero shot classifier would do that, but you don't have to do the training. So you just give it the
Oh,
5 different
yeah,
types of pages, and it's like, oh, this is a Schedule A. You're like, what?
yeah.
um, but it can do that because it's been trained on a trillion parameters and
Mm-hmm.
Wikipedia or all this other stuff. It's like it's reasoning. It's
Right,
sort of
right,
like
right.
this is probably
Yeah,
a Schedule A because it's like thinking the way we think. So,
yeah.
um, so you know, like, what do you do with that when we're able to do that? And I'm looking forward to seeing like what do people do with that.
Yeah. So along those lines, what do how do you feel about all of the hype that's surrounding AI? I mean, you know a hell of a lot more than the average person about what these AIs are capable of doing, what they're capable of doing when you combine them together into these, complex, kinds of architectures and so forth. Um, there's a lot of hype out there, both on the on what they're capable of doing, but also on the negative side. To your point, obviously they're prone to hallucinations and so forth. And just like any system, I guess the way you can tell me if you disagree with me, but just like any system, if you feed it bad data, it's going to have bad data that comes out of it. It's garbage in, garbage out. So we have to be really, really careful and mindful about the data that these models are trained on and so forth. So obviously there's the negative side and the positive side, but just in terms of your thinking, like help us to see like the art of the possible. How do you envision the future, over the next 5-10 years, and how AI will shape things, or how it will shape itself?
Yeah, and I spend most of my time when thinking about that answer. I apply it to the real estate technology and specifically title offices and title insurance. And I've been asked, and I've spoken at conferences on this topic and webinars, and so I put thought into how do I communicate this to owners of title offices and
Yeah.
insurance agents. So I mentioned that just because my explanation may come through that lens. The one thing that I think is interesting is a calculator was AI, until it became commonplace.
Mm-hmm.
So I think AI is really, it's when computers start to kind of automate and do things that and I think the thing that happened was this transformer paper came out
Yeah.
and ChatGPT.
Changed
You
everything.
first time you use it, you're like, what? How did this happen? It's like We don't have hoverboards and self-tying shoes, but somehow magically this whole chat, like I can have a conversation with a computer, and
I'm
I
with you,
feel like
man.
it just surpassed. Like I thought that would be 20 years from now.
Yeah. So here's something interesting, just to interject real quick, just to
Oh,
kind
please.
of bolster that point. Like when I was back in the Navy, okay, I will never forget the first time I heard "Smells Like Teen Spirit" by Nirvana. Like that memory is etched in my mind because it freaking blew me away. Same thing with ChatGPT. I will never forget the first time I sat down and I used ChatGPT. I was amazed.
Hmm.
I literally couldn't believe what I was reading, man.
Hmm. Yeah, same. Like it sounds almost like I don't know, like a story. But when I first used ChatGPT, I asked it because it was reasoning. I'm like, what is there a word for
Yeah.
um, interacting with a technology that you feel is effectively like more advanced than you thought was possible?
Yeah.
um, like the anxiety that can come with like, wow,
Yeah.
this and I was having coffee, and uh, uh, Chris Sauersoff, who told me about ChatGPT, is like, and it can code. I'm like, no, it can't code. And like, boy, it sure can code.
Yeah. And from just narrative, just tell it what you want in whatever
Uh-huh.
language you want. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. He was like, I used it to write requirements for a Fiverr developer. I'm like, no, that's, and this is before I'd ever used it. I'm like, what? Um, so like back to the, like and sometime it's going to feel commonplace. I mean, in the same way Alexa still is feeling commonplace,
Yeah,
or the calculator feels commonplace,
exactly. Yeah, man.
Um, I also think it's a direct a corollary to humans' obsession with speed of communication. Um, like Napoleon had his semaphores, and it would take 6 minutes to transmit, 20 words across France. Um,
Hmm.
then we get the telephone, and then we get long distance communications. We get the internet. I mean, we're just obsessed with like how fast can I now communicate? I can put a pretty advanced idea out on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
of all things,
Yeah, no kidding.
faster than I would ever thought possible. So, um, like, I don't think and if you put it into that sort of uh, speed of communication category, it to me it makes it feel better because it's just something we've been obsessed with forever. Like
Hmm.
we didn't stop with semaphore, like large towers with structures communicating words, and we won't stop as a species. So that's more philosophical, but practically speaking, when I do talk about AI to title offices and insurance underwriters, and the first time specifically, a question in the audience was, "What about hallucinations?" Somebody copied and pasted in a legal briefing, and it was found all the references were um, never existed. And my theme there is like, how many of you in the audience have an AI strategy? Like, you guys are all business owners here.
Hmm.
If you don't have an AI strategy that or a policy that specifically says your employees can't do that, then when they do that, you have no like people feel that sense of anxiety. I feel that sense of anxiety when I'm using it. Like the
Yeah.
best thing I can do as a leader is give some degree of uh, like guidelines around it, and even from protecting the business to just giving people answers to the kind of questions and ultimately even their like feelings. So um, having a strategy, a policy that speaks to like responsible use, um, talking about it before it becomes a problem. I think the and then yeah, back to having it through that lens of speed of communication. It sort of now starts to make sense to me.
Hmm.
Like, oh, we're using it like we've used any tool, like long distance communication and cell phones. Like
That's right,
we're
man.
never going to stop. Um,
Well, and
so
to your point earlier, it can code. The way I think of it is that AI is like the, AI will be the new building blocks. It will. I would imagine a world where we won't need IDEs. We won't need to write code because the important thing is we need to be the ones that are in charge of the ideas and the unique ideas and making sure that what AI is generating is reflective of our voice. You know,
mhm.
so
Yeah, and there was also maybe the counterbalance where interacting with ChatGPT and giving like that first moment of like of awe, to the counterbalance being like working with large language models and realizing it's kind of predicting the next word. And because it's just so massive on trillions of data points,
Mm-hmm.
it predicts sentences and paragraphs. And but it's stateless, so there is no I mean, I suppose one could write software, but it's still it's all very still intentional. It's not like
Yeah.
like that computer running AI, knock on wood, isn't going to like wake up unless I call the Python request library and hit the completions endpoint and ask it a question so it can like predict the next sentence that comes later. So
Right.
some of the magic um, left when I was interacting and kind of thinking about how can I operationalize this and leverage it in the
Yeah.
industry that I'm in.
So speaking of the industry that you're in and all of these conversations you have with the business and title companies and so forth, are there things that you wish, the business and like boards better understood about technology?
um, I uh, I think about real estate probably more than maybe a lot of the people you hang out with. um,
Probably.
I I think of and I have like a good friend of mine asked like why are you in real estate as well, and I enjoy the complexity of it. I like
Yeah.
thinking about the different
Because you're
offices
you're
in the
a
courthouse.
builder, you're a problem solver, and it's an interesting problem for you to solve. It's kind of the way that I see it. You can,
Hmm.
yeah,
No, I think you're right. And when I for real estate, like there's a difference between say owning a house and owning a car. If someone's stealing my car, I'll call the police. If somebody's coming into my house, it's like a biological reaction. I mean,
right, man,
and I think the systems that we've built up around transferring real estate are inefficient, largely for those reasons. We
hmm
have 88 counties in Ohio that have jurisdiction over individual counties. We have it's very difficult to transfer property, probably because that's the way we want it to be.
right, right,
and
right,
and so when I think about the application of technology within real estate, which hopefully there's a corollary to other folks who are listening to this in their industries, would be that human element. Like how does one do change management with technology in a industry that is built around people and their like need to protect their homes and and their asset that helps them refinance and afford interesting things. I mean, it's huge.
hmm
So
yeah,
um, this earlier we talked about maker checker verifier and the application of AI, and we uh, developed a concept of AI integration impact matrix, which is really all about change management and being able to go into a large company and say, here's a way of going through like four levels of maturity. You don't have to go to four; like you can go to one. You can think about your
right,
processes in a way that where you can start to ease in. And if you follow a maker checker verifier process, or if you like understand kind of what that would look like at a level 4, and understand what it would look like at a level 1, accepting that level 0 is there is no technology. So in thinking about the application of technology, broadly speaking, but also within technology and real estate, it's understanding the reasons that go beyond just pure inefficiency. Um, it's not this way, or I would argue it's this way because the majority of people who use it want it this way, and
hmm
understanding the reasons for that has been like very interesting.
I bet, man. Starting with why, going back to this whole concept, man. Yeah, no kidding.
as as a reader, there's a book called The Mystery of Capital that talks about some of the reasons why we've built systems and the systems that are absent from other countries. Like arguably, uh, like the U.S. would have a competitive advantage because we have strong laws around property ownership, so
Mm,
that if you were to put the equity in your home up for to a bank and then they're going to give you money for it, there's a lot of guarantees and assumptions in that process that we take for granted.
but really, to your point, offer tremendous competitive advantage on a
Mm-hmm.
worldwide kind of a scale. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
really,
we have
really
access
fascinating,
to
man.
capital
Hmm
in a way that if you were uncertain about your ownership of something as big as a house, or if a government could come in and take all of the land, all of these things. Yeah, we have these, like, arguably sometimes convoluted and kind of esoteric processes in place, but it's all kind of designed to guarantee certain things.
Oh yeah, man. For the benefit of all of us. So, hey, I want to be respectful of your time. We have been talking for almost, well, over an hour and a half. This has been just fascinating. I had asked you if you had a theme song for your life. You told me that it was going to be a song. It's the song "Last Word" by Baroness. Now, I don't know if folks have heard this song. It's a great song. It's got a great, punchy feel to it, and the lyrics are really interesting as well. To me, when I listen to the song, it talks about, kind of having a lasting impact and memories and so forth. To me, it resonates with the concept of legacy. So, as you think about your career and just the amazing, journey that you've taken, what would you say you'd want your lasting impact to be?
Yeah, and I think for that song, it means this uh, similar things to me. It's a
Mhm.
song about a lot of self reflection. The know thyself. It's a moment when professionally, at Chase, I had a um, reasonable career and made a choice, and it was difficult. It had its own kind of escape velocity. That moment where you're like, I'm going to quit a perfectly reasonable job to be the CTO and a co-founder of a startup where the chances are low that you'll be successful, but
Yeah,
I
very
want to
risky.
do this because I don't want to not have done it.
Hell yeah, man. That's
um,
awesome.
I also wanted, knowing that you're a songwriter, I wanted to offer. There's a lot about this particular song beyond just its lyrics as well.
Hmm.
It's a kind of falls in a metal category.
Yeah.
It's hard hitting. It's punchy.
Hmm.
The guitar solo is, I would argue like one of the best, and it's by Baroness's lead guitarist, who's female, and I think that's super cool. And I
Hell yeah.
mentioned earlier about the being surrounded by strong females. I think
Hmm.
the Baroness as a band, they're very hardworking. They've had, like, I don't know, maybe 6 albums. They're all a little bit different, and
Hmm.
they've played in probably every venue in Columbus of and they come here and they just hustle. They're very hardworking. So there's the lyrics and the rhythm, the genre, the band members, the fact that they work hard. So I that's why I picked.
Hell
It
yeah,
just kind of
man.
fires on all
Yeah,
cylinders.
no kidding, man. Checks all the boxes for sure, man. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
and
hey,
yeah, and as far as like lasting impact, as we go to a lot of the same networking events. I feel like the Ben Blanquero, like, how can I help message resonates with me. I mean, I do
oh yeah.
try to put myself out there in a way that is supportive to either people in my situation or people who haven't been in my situation or people completely different that I can learn from and benefit from as well. So I try to be as authentic as possible with the offer to help, and I put effort into following through on those things. So
Love it. Yeah, and that just takes us right back to where we started, man. Just being a part of this great community and knowing great people like you. So thanks for the talk, man. This was just fantastic. I really enjoyed every minute of it, and looking forward to getting this out of the community. So
yeah, same. And I'll look forward to interviewing you. I feel like I did maybe even as appropriate a lot of the talking, but you're by far more interesting than me. So
mm,
you've had a number of great accomplishments. So thanks for having me on that show and
my
for
pleasure,
thanking me
man.
for it.
My pleasure, Rob.